Nine on Your Side Democracy 2017 mayoral debate is sponsored by WOSL, WDBZ, and the Society of Professional Journalists. This is a special presentation of WCPO 9 on Your Side, a debate on the future of Cincinnati, with the two candidates for mayor of the Queen City. Live, the Democracy 2017 mayoral debate. The moderator of tonight's debate, 9 on Your Side anchor, Tanya O'Rourke.
Good evening, everyone. Cincinnatians go to the poll 4 weeks from today, November 7th. They will choose the next mayor who will lead the city for the next 4 years. The debate is being presented live from the Cincinnati Art Museum to give voters information that you need to make an informed choice. Tonight's program is sponsored by 9 on Your Side, 100.3 R&B and Old School, Soul 101.5 and 1230 AM, and the Greater Cincinnati Pro Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. Let's meet the two candidates. Attorney John Cranley is the current mayor seeking a second term. Attorney Yvette Simpson has been a member of Cincinnati City Council since 2011. They will be quizzed by our panel of journalists. Paula Christian is the politics reporter for WCPO. Lincoln Ware hosts a popular daily talk show on WDBZ Radio, a Radio 1 property. Tom McKee is president of the Greater Cincinnati chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, as well as a WCPO reporter. This debate is being broadcast live on WCPO and on Facebook, plus Radio 1 stations for the next hour. At 8 o'clock, we will sign off here and continue live streaming on WCPO.com and Facebook, plus airing on Radio 1 stations. So here is how this is going to work. Each candidate will give a 2-minute opening statement, and then they will take questions from the panelists. Now, the first candidate to answer will get a 1-minute response. The second candidate will have 1 minute, 30 seconds for a response and a rebuttal. And then we'll go back to the first candidate, who will have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. Now, also, at some point during this hour, we are going to give the candidates a chance to ask their opponent a question. Candidates will have 1 minute to ask that question, 90 seconds to answer, and 30 seconds to rebut. Now, as we get closer to the 8 o'clock hour, we will have a speed round of questions where each candidate has 30 seconds to answer. Audience members, please refrain from applauding during this debate. We appreciate you being here tonight. Now let's begin with opening statements. We will start alphabetically. That means we start with John Cranley. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting us tonight. I believe the city is moving in the right direction, and we have a proven track record of progress. Objectively, the city is better off today than it was 4 years ago. 4 years ago, there was no GE building on the riverfront. There was no Kroger building a new grocery store downtown and a $90 million building on top. No Mercy Hospital headquartered in Bond Hill. And of course, Children's hadn't agreed to make the largest single investment in the history of in the city. And of course, there was no FC Cincinnati. Our policies of job growth and progress are working. They're working because first we put our foundation back together. We put more cops on the street, more firefighters out there to deal with the heroin epidemic and to end brownouts. We paved more streets. We dealt with the pension crisis and balanced the budget 4 years in a row, restoring the fiscal credibility of our city. But at the same time, we have reached out to those who haven't yet felt the renaissance. Our efforts to reduce poverty are working. There's a lot more work ahead of us. What we have done is partner with the best in class job training programs to help single mothers get back into the workforce. At the same time, we've worked to close racial disparities by increasing the number of contracts we received from 3% to 17% over the last 3 years. This is real progress, but we have much further to go. As we transition to the future, let's continue this progress and not put it at risk. Let's continue to put safety first by putting more cops on the street and taking a tough love approach to the heroin crisis. Let's continue the successful policies that bring jobs into the city and not put those policies at risk. Let's continue to put neighborhoods ahead of pet projects and spending at City Hall. Let's do so by cleaning up and improving the cleanliness of our city and a housing court to hold landlords accountable.
Thank you, Mr. Cranley. Ms. Simpson, you have your opening statement. You have 2 minutes.
I want to thank the host of tonight's debate and all those who are tuning in either here or on television. My name is Yvette Simpson, and I'm running for mayor of the great city of Cincinnati. I love this city. I was born here, raised here, educated here, and I have served this city. This next step is an extension of that service. Our city deserves a visionary leader who will lead our city with an open door, an open ear, and an open heart. One who will bring together council, our administration, stakeholders, businesses, and citizens. A strong advocate and a tireless leader and ambassador for our city. A problem solver who will thoughtfully and diligently approach the challenges that we face, and a leader who will give her all to ensure our city reaches its full potential. Public service is not a job for me. It is truly my calling. From birth, the deck was stacked against me. My passion for this work comes from my desire to make sure that every child, regardless of where they're born, has the same opportunity as I had. That's why when I look into the eyes of our young people, I see potential, possibility, and I'm committed to make sure that they will be successful. Our children can't wait. The time is right now. Far too many people are still waiting on their worlds to change. There is still so much for us to do. If you have no vision, then you have no future. And I have a strong vision for our city, and I plan to work so hard and work together to make sure this vision becomes a reality. Let me share that vision with you. I envision a Cincinnati with thriving, diverse neighborhoods that provide ample opportunities for the people who live and work there. I envision a Cincinnati where residents feel safe and are invested in the safety and the future of their neighborhoods. A Cincinnati that attracts jobs and talent, and where both long-term residents and newcomers are proud to call this city home. As the city's 70th mayor, if elected, I promise to set this vision and work harder and smarter to see it realized. Together, we will make this city greater for everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. Now let's get to our questions. Our first question is for Mr. Cranley from WCPO political reporter Paula Christian. A reminder that you will have 1 minute for your response.
This year, City Manager Harry Black said the city came within a millimeter of laying off employees and closing buildings in order to plug a $26 million deficit and balance the budget. He warned the city cannot keep balancing its budget by making cuts and freezing new hires. The city needs new revenue. As mayor, what new revenue stream would you propose?
Thank you. I think it's important to go back and talk about the history. When I was elected, the city hadn't balanced a budget in many, many years. For 4 straight years in a row, we have structurally balanced a budget by prioritizing the basic services of police and fire and the things that people care about. So my opponent said before we were elected that it wouldn't be balanced for 5 years. She has opposed the budgets that we passed that restored fiscal credibility to our city. What we will do is continue to live within our means, which is why I vetoed a property tax increase a year and a half ago, and it's why we have earned an upgrade from S&P and Moody's. So I do not believe that we need a new revenue source to balance our budget. I do believe that we need to continue to prioritize the basic services of police, fire, inclusion, neighborhood quality of life, and bringing down the blight of neighborhoods. By reprioritizing the city's budget, we have structurally balanced it 4 years in a row and earned an upgrade from S&P.
Thank you, Mr. Cranley. Well, Ms. Simpson, you have 1:30 to respond.
I want to thank you for that question, Paula. The city manager is right in the respect that we don't have a recession to blame for the challenges we've had with our budget. When I came on council, all the challenges that my opponent talks about were true, but we were in the middle of a recession. Not only that, but we had just gotten steep cuts to the local government fund. Over the last few years, what I've watched is that we've gone from being able to blame those two things to now the economy is doing better and we have 8-figure deficits. $23 million this year, 20-some million dollars a year before. I don't consider that structural balance if we're carrying over deficits. What do we do about it? First, we've got to make sure that our operation is as lean as it can be. And that starts with centralizing our administration. Unfortunately, we have a decentralized model now. What I would say is that we need to centralize our budget and finance. We need to centralize our legal department. We need to centralize our HR function, our CTO, our technology function at the first instance. And I think we're going to find some savings there. We need to invest on the capital side in technology so that we use people to do the job as efficiently as they can to do the people job and let technology do that. That doesn't mean we reduce our footprint of people. It just means we allow people to do their best work because they have the technology to do it better. That improves our service delivery. We also need to make sure we're looking at shared services in a new way. We missed the opportunity to combine with the county on the crime lab. Now it's going to Blue Ash instead of staying in the city. We decoupled from the permitting center with the county. We built out our own space outside of the county. We're still paying that money back.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. You do have 30 seconds. Mr. Cranley.
The history matters. The fact is, when the budget wasn't balanced, Councilmember Simpson voted for it, which reduced our cops and firefighters. Her solution to balance the budget was to privatize and sell off the city's parking assets, meters and garages, to a Wall Street company, to borrow a bunch of money and leave that debt to our kids. I said no, that you can't paper over a deficit by privatizing public assets. That's not the way to balance a budget. The way to balance a budget is to make the tough choices, to solve the pension, to prioritize basic services.
Thank you for that. Apologies for that beep. Lincoln Ware of WDBZ Radio has the next question. It will go to Ms. Simpson, and a reminder that you have 1 minute to respond.
All right, let's talk a little bit about economic development. You know, it's so important to the city, and 3CDC is so successful for downtown and over the Rhine. A lot of people are wondering, why isn't there a similar organization and effort created to handle redevelopment in places like Avondale, Bond Hill, Roseline, even Evanston?
So one of the things I want to talk about first is kind of what's happening in our neighborhoods right now, and I'm hugely supportive of neighborhood development. But when I'm in my office in Walnut Hills right now, what I hear people saying when I'm walking down the street is that they're excited about the development, but they're worried that it won't include them, that they will be pushed out of their neighborhoods, developed out of their own neighborhoods. We have to make sure that as we do development, that doesn't happen. I've recommended that we do affordable housing trust fund. That was rejected, but now we have a funding source to do it, and I think it'll go forward. That we look for new innovative ways to provide housing that everyone can live in, regardless of your income, and that we don't have, you know, the reverse of what we had before, where we have people of different strata living in different places. I want to make sure that we give the funding that's necessary. So we're talking about developing a neighborhood support fund that would be able to catalyze development strategically, and that we continue to support the neighborhood CDCs that are currently in our community that are doing a great job with the community voice there first. And I think any development that happens needs to have the voice of the community consistently at the table.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. You have 1:30. Mr. Cranley, for your rebuttal.
You know, neighborhoods are feeling optimistic. Things are happening. As I highlighted in a State of the City speech last week, breweries are popping up in every neighborhood, and walkability is back. There's an optimism. 4 years ago, there was no optimism because there weren't enough cops in the neighborhood, there weren't enough firefighters in the neighborhood, there weren't enough roads being paved in the neighborhood, and all they could see was City Hall focused on pet projects down at City Hall for a small number of people versus investing with them, listening to them in the neighborhoods. Over the last 4 years, first we dealt with the things that every regular citizen wants: more cops, more firefighters, better basic services. But we've also taken money that was set aside for the streetcar, the Blue Ash Airport money sale, which years ago was promised to the neighborhoods, then given to the streetcar, and we gave it back. And so we worked with Madisonville at Madison and Wetzel. We worked with Avondale, and we'll be breaking ground on the Avondale Town Center in a couple weeks. We worked with Westwood to bring new life to Westwood Square. We worked with College Hill at the Hamilton North Bend and a new senior mixed income housing project in the heart of Hamilton Avenue. These are just a few examples of working with neighborhoods. You know how you prioritize neighborhoods over pet spending at City Hall? You prioritize neighborhoods. You put the money where your mouth is. You don't just talk about neighborhoods. You deliver for neighborhoods. And you deliver by listening to the projects that they want. Wasson Way is another great example.
Thank you, Mr.
On the east
Cranley.
side. Thank you.
You have 30 seconds.
So again, my opponent has no plan for how we do neighborhood development in the future. He's talking about projects that have already been completed or in the process of being completed. We're talking about a roadmap for neighborhoods so that they know in our ready, set, go plan where they are in the trajectory. Neighborhoods will see investment. All 52 will see some investment in the first 4 years of my administration. We will make sure there are resources set aside so that they know they will be there in the long term, similar to the Focus 52 program that we started before this administration, which they cut immediately upon starting. We need to make sure we give them some assurances that the resources will be there and that they will have everything they need to make sure the development in their community is informed by them and is what they want to see.
Our next question is from Greater Cincinnati SPJ President and WCPO reporter Tom McKee. It'll be for Mr. Cranley.
Thank you, Tanya. Of course, the Cincinnati Children's Hospital project is one of the largest ever in city history, and as we neared the vote for that project, there was a plan put on the table that many have said was an effort to extract money, millions of dollars from Children's Hospital in return for a yes vote. Is this the way city development deals should be put together going into the future?
Oh, absolutely not. Children's Hospital is an amazing institution that is making the largest single investment in the history of the city, $550 million, to expand their critical services for children in a neighborhood that is one of our highest crimes and highest poverty neighborhoods in our city. They are part of the solution, not part of the problem. They've already invested and have agreed to invest millions more in the neighborhood, and they're investing minority inclusion in the construction. They tutor kids in the neighborhood, and they provide free primary care for the kids of Avondale. What my opponent did of trying to extract $27 million at the last minute was a terrible precedent. And what's worse is the way that they talked about Children's is as if Children's owed us, as opposed to the fact that they are a symbol of our progress and we should be working with them. And candidly, on a day like today, when you think about what happened with Procter & Gamble, we dodged a bullet. But we need a mayor that knows how to work with businesses, not against them.
Thank you, Mr. Cranley.
So let me directly answer the question. None of the actions that I did could be characterized or should be characterized as extraction. It was a proposal for Children's that they did not accept. But it's not new, right? You go up to Nationwide Hospital, Children's Hospital in Columbus, they're doing catalytic investment around the hospital's footprint. You go to Good Sam in Dayton, they're developing housing, new structures around their hospital. You know who's not doing it right? Cleveland. Cleveland Clinic learned the hard way that you can't build out your hospital footprint and have the area around it be vacant, full of blight and crime. Children's owns a lot of housing outside the expansion footprint, and our proposal was a way for them to do what these other cities have done, which is to have vibrancy around the hospital, which I think is a win-win for Children's and for the community around it. I'm not going to apologize for recommending something that could have been, I think, a great visionary thing to do. I will accept the fact that it was rejected. I think a great mayor puts those proposals at the table and makes sure both the community and the business community are heard.
Mr. Cranley, you have 30 seconds.
Visionary, to hold up the largest investment in the history of the city. Visionary. My definition of visionary is helping kids get out of poverty, welcoming new jobs, because that builds an economy that helps all. It was a demand, and recently Councilmember Simpson said the only thing she learned that it was bad politics. She didn't learn that it was wrong for the city. She didn't learn that it was wrong for the kids who won't be helped in Avondale. She said, political lesson, it hurt me politically. Never once did she say, I was wrong. And I believe that's what we need to hear if we're going to continue this renaissance in this city.
At this time, we would like the candidates to ask their opponents a question. We will start with Mr. Cranley. You will have 1 minute to ask the question, should you need that much time. And then, Ms. Simpson, you'll have a minute and a half to respond.
On this topic of Children's, you have repeatedly said that you're a collaborative leader and that you work with people. And it's been widely reported that you had several meetings with Children's Hospital prior to your demand for $20 million for a zoning change. Why did you spring it on them at the last second? And you said if you had known that they were going to refuse it, you wouldn't have done it. What information did you receive from Children's in these meetings that led you to believe that they would accept your demand?
So first of all, I want to be very clear that the expansion was never in jeopardy. We knew the votes were there. Children's knew the votes were there. I was the yes vote to get it out of committee to make sure that it was on the council calendar. So clearly, I was supportive of the project. We were trying to find a bit more. In my conversations with Children's, we had talked about the housing that they owned and the fact that we wanted to see Project Reach by the Redevelopment Authority or something there. And they were affirmative in that. They believed that that was the right thing. In their meetings with the community, they used Nationwide as an example. They used Good Sam and Dayton as an example of what we could do. So everything that we thought was affirmative. We made the proposal because we thought they would accept it. Unfortunately, they did not. But we had no indication that they were opposed to developing the land that they own around the expansion so that we could have a better development. This was a way to take what was already going to happen, a great expansion, and make it better like we see with our neighbors up the road.
Mr. Cranley, you do have 30 seconds to respond if you'd like to.
Well, Mr. Fisher said in a letter that none of the proposals had been shared with them beforehand. That is not, in my opinion, a definition of how to be a collaborative leader. And I'll reiterate, in light of what happened with Procter & Gamble today, we need a mayor. This is a city for me and my family and our kids and our kids' kids. We need a mayor who understands that you work with people, not against them, not blindside them with proposals at the very last second. And it's fair enough that she believes it's visionary. My definition of visionary, as I said, is working
Thank you, Mr.
to reduce poverty.
It is now your turn, Ms. Simpson, to ask him a question. You have a minute to do so.
So my opponent is a huge kind of fan, and I think he considers himself a visionary leader on the area of inclusion. And there have been some questions we haven't been able to get answered, and I'd like them to answer them today. Number one, what is the percentage of spend for the city in 2016 and the first part of 2017? Not the percentage of award, but the percentage of contracts that minority and women-owned businesses got compared to the total spend. What is that percentage? And the second part of this question is, when you were a developer in the Incline project and had the dollars and the wherewithal to control your project, what was the minority spend on your project?
You have a minute and a half.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up this great topic of the progress we're making. As you know, for 20 years, the city was stuck at 2 to 3% of contracts going to African-American businesses. I promised to do something about it. I put together a coalition of folks. We looked at Atlanta. We looked at Cleveland. We adopted the best practices. We adopted a Croson study. We created the first ever Office of Economic Inclusion, and we made it a priority. And if there's one thing that I've developed a reputation for is if I put my mind to something, we worked really hard to accomplish it. And that's why we've seen progress on so many different fronts. So we have taken contracts from 3% to 17% in 3 years. The spend data and the award data are both being tracked, as you know. So the 17% is, I forget, 19 million roughly, of which roughly 9 million or so has been spent, has been publicly reported repeatedly by the city manager. My opponent keeps trying to create a false narrative that the spend and the awards are not being reported. The fact is that these reports are available right now in public. But the city manager has been clear from the get-go that when you get awarded a contract for $1 million, the city doesn't just hand you $1 million. You spend down that contract over a period of a year, 18 months, 6 months, 3 months, depending on how long the contract is. So the city manager has been clear from day one that the spending lags the award.
You have 30 seconds.
I wanted the question to be answered. So the 2% number that he cites is actual spend, right? What is the percentage of money spent in that year with minorities versus the overall spend? I didn't get the spend number. What was the percentage for spend? In 2016?
You and I have the same access to the same information. Do you have the report the city manager has provided to you?
I've requested it countless times. Do you
it's
have
a public
number?
Document.
Okay. And how about the Incline project?
Actually, we were out of time on this. I apologize for that.
Darn.
We will move back to our panel, though, and Paula Christian has the next question. It'll be for Ms. Simpson.
Many city buildings, not just Police District 5, are in bad shape. A recent report predicts a $190 million shortfall in capital improvements needed to city buildings over the next 5 years. Take, for example, the city's municipal garage. Built in 1939, so dilapidated that city employees worry the floors may collapse. What is your specific plan to address outdated city buildings before an accident happens?
So let me first say that the challenge that we have here is one that when we did our review of the city manager, we all agreed that this was something that we didn't quite understand. We didn't feel like we had a plan for replacing city buildings. I was proud to be a part of a council that replaced quite a few buildings, including during the first net zero police station and the first police station that we've done in 50 years. My plan is to take a portion of our capital budget and set it aside specifically for these long-term projects to leverage that and make sure that we always have that money down the road. Right now, we don't have that type of structure. So every year we have about $90 million in the capital budget. It's a free-for-all how that money is spent. We want to set aside a third for cash capital, which is what we maintenance all the time, a third for economic development, and a third for these long-term physical facilities projects. We have to do an assessment of the state of all of our projects first, and then we'll have a better sense of how much there is to do. But by setting aside a portion of our capital budget, we know that that money is always there.
You have a minute and a half.
It's a huge issue, Paula, and if you think about it from the citizen's point of view, the three big capital items that affect people are roads and bridges, our fleet. So it's police cruisers, ambulances, sanitation trucks, et cetera. And then you've got city facilities. We can't function without a police district. You can't function without a firehouse, et cetera. We are doing as much as we can, as fast as we can, to address the deficiencies in all three of those areas. But we put the citizen first, which is why we've put together a 5-year plan to repair the city's roads and bridges. We're 2 years through a 5-year plan. The roads and bridges that we inherited were a mess. We're making progress, but there's more work to do. We have seen a major investment in replacing our fleet, police cruisers, fire trucks, sanitation trucks, the things that people depend on for basic services. And we're getting to facilities. As you're ranking from the interest of the citizen, the facilities are the last thing that the citizen feels. So it's true that it hasn't been as high on the priority list as roads and police cruisers and fire trucks and sanitation trucks, et cetera. But we are working on that. And part of that is by prioritizing away from pet projects that are popular downtown to remembering that neighborhoods want those basic services and to put the citizen first.
Thank you.
So we have to make sure we have a plan and we have money set aside, and that's the challenge. We can't tell you in our capital budget what money is going to be ready for these facilities, and we need to make sure we do that. We took on a tremendous amount of debt to buy new cars and do those roads, which is fine. That's 6 years of debt that's going to have to be replenished because the roads will have to be repaired again. If we're going to take on debt, we should do it for longer term, 30, 50, 90-year buildings. And so that would be our plan, is to make sure that we have money set aside. And if we're going to borrow it, we do it for these types of projects. And that clears up more money in our daily capital to do roads and sidewalks and other things that need to be repaired more often. Thank you, Ms. Simpson.
Our next question comes from WDBZ's Lincoln Ware. It'll be for Mr. Cranley.
All right. I think Ms. Simpson stole my question, but I'll bring it back up since you two didn't finish arguing about it. How about that? How committed are you to expanding the number of contracts the city signs with minority firms? The numbers show progress, but what's next? What project can you cite that stands out as an example of public minority firm partnerships?
I want to thank you, Lincoln, for your question. I want to repeat what you said. The numbers show progress. These are facts. Councilmember Simpson tonight and in previous debates is, despite the fact that she's a member of City Council and is part of City Hall, is trying to suggest that the city manager and others are out there trying to mislead the public. Let me be clear. From day one, you get an award, it takes time to spend it. So the spend lags the award. And what Councilmember Simpson has been trying to suggest is somehow that because the spend isn't all spent on day one, that it hasn't matched the award yet. This is what's been honestly reported. And yet, as you point out, the numbers show progress. A good example has been that we have leveraged beyond our own spending with economic development deals, meaning private developers like 3C or Music Hall or other major projects that are being built. that we have required on developers doing business with the
Thank
city
you, Mr. Cranley.
to do more minority inclusion.
So for the record, I'm still waiting on that spend percentage. It is not 17%. It will not be 17%. It will probably be something less than that, but it's just important to know. We spent a certain amount of money, and we need to know what percentage of that was actually spent in the year was to minority contractors. The 2% number that he used is actual spend. So to compare the two is really deceptive because he knows that the 2% number is a spend, but he's reporting the 17% number, which is an award, which is likely a larger percentage. Regardless, I believe in big I inclusion and not little I inclusion. We got to make sure first that the system that we have is working. I am proud of the minority inclusion program. I think it's great that we've said that we want to do this, but we've already seen contractors who are saying they're not getting paid. Subcontractors are not getting paid. We have some subcontractors that are giving bids. That bid gets canceled, and then someone else who is not a minority ends up submitting their bid and getting the contract. We've got to make sure that we're fixing the problems with our current system. And then we've got to think bigger. We need to look at inclusion of workforce. How many people of color are working on these job sites? We've got to look at contracting across the board, not just African Americans, but women-owned businesses, Hispanic-owned businesses, Asian-owned businesses. How are they doing? We need to look at both prime and subcontracts, not just subcontracts. How are we doing? Are there things we can do to improve those numbers in that relationship? And then finally, we need to look at minority investment. The Vernon Manor project, which was children's project, which I helped to support by finding $10 million in gap funding to do that expansion with children.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson.
That project, oh, thank you.
You have 30 seconds.
I was just getting started.
We should be celebrating the progress that Lincoln mentioned. The spend will equal the award. It takes time to actually execute on those contracts. Let's not put out misinformation. Let's be proud of the progress we have made. There's more progress to be made. But the fact is that we would have moved a lot faster had Councilmember Simpson not slowed down our progress by not supporting the Croson study, which allowed us to get to 17% in awards. And that spend of that award would have happened a lot sooner had she not spent 2 years preventing that Croson study from getting
Cranley.
funded.
To Tom McKee, who has a question for Ms. Simpson.
Yeah, Tanya. Greater Cincinnati is said to be maybe number 13 on the list to get this huge Amazon headquarters for 50,000 jobs, whatever. What incentives should the city offer to try and lure this kind of investment here? And are they good business practice? Because the road of investments and incentives is lined with people who get incentives, get projects, and don't fulfill their required jobs and such, and they're never held accountable for it.
So I want to make sure I respond before I go. I co-sponsored the motion, actually the commission, the Croson study on January 26, 2012. You can check the record. That was 2 years before John Cranley became mayor. So I just want to make sure that we clarify that because he said that several times and it's just not true. Amazon is about more than just incentives. They're looking for a city of the future, the type of city that I want to build as your next mayor. And if we had actually been talking about broader transit, we'd be more competitive right now instead of fighting over the streetcar that was already here, trying to pull up bike lanes that were already down. We'd be more competitive. If we had continued the Queensgate development with the redevelopment authority as we pushed to do, but this administration cut the funding, we'd have a ready site for Amazon to go to. And we need to make sure that we're always constantly building a city that an Amazon would want to come to. And then we can talk about incentives. So I'm glad that the team put together, I think, a regional approach. We want to make sure that we're bidding regionally, but I think we're less competitive because of the decisions that we've made over the last 4 years instead of more competitive.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson.
We are going to try to win Amazon.com. We are already working on our bid together. And we have ready sites at the banks and in Newport, and we pulled together the leaders of Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati to put the bid together. But the fact is that job growth doesn't just happen. You need leadership. We need leadership that's collaborative and not hostile. The night after I was elected mayor, I made 2 calls the following morning. First, I called Procter & Gamble, and I said, you're kind of a big deal. If you ever need me, let me know. I didn't think they'd take me up on the offer, but they did over the last couple of weeks. I wrote a letter to the Enquirer to vote blue, and thank God we did. That's holding on to great institutions. The next call was to Mercy to try to convince them to locate in Bond Hill. because I spend part of every day to try to bring new jobs and diversify our economy. We have a proven track record of progress on jobs, whether it's GE or Kroger or Mercy, and being there for great institutions like P&G and Children's. And think about it. In light of what we've seen of our track record of progress, in light of the real threat to P&G, to Kroger, to Macy's, this is not a game. This is about the future of our region. And we're going to reach for the stars and try to win the Amazon.com bid. And you win it by having a collaborative approach, not a hostile approach.
Thank you.
And you have it by having a track record of success.
So I'm proud of my relationship with the business community. As I said, we partnered with Children's on several initiatives, including the Vernon Manor expansion, which we helped get done by finding $10 million in gap funding. That was the first expansion for Children's in the Avondale area, and Avondale gave $2.5 million to that as well. We also, when I meet with the business community, they say to me, how can we help? So I've asked GE to help us with leaning out our processes, making sure we have the best-in-class technology to run our operations. I've talked to Cincinnati Bell about upgrading our technology since my computer was just upgraded to Windows 10 just last week.
Thank you.
So we need to make sure we're partnering with our business community, and they're willing to do that.
Thank you. Back to Paula Christian, who will have a question for Mr. Cranley.
Let's see. U.S. Bank Arena needs a renovation. The convention center and its dated hotel need upgrades. And FC Cincinnati wants taxpayers to kick in $100 million for a new stadium. Should city tax dollars go to any of these projects?
Well, those city dollars, like our general fund dollars that we use for police and fire and basic services, should not go to any of those projects. A couple of the big projects that I think are more important than the ones you mentioned are, of course, the Brent Spence Bridge, which is primarily a federal issue, but we're lobbying for it, and the Western Hills Viaduct, which is a critical link to the west side and is something that will continue to be a major priority. And so as we lobby the federal, the state, or if we think about any additional resources locally, I think we have to prioritize those major projects that help the most number of people. It is the case, in addition to that, that we are talking about the hotel groups, who charge people who don't live here, who come to stay here from other places. They have routinely asked, on occasion, to raise that tax on outsiders to expand the convention center or to look at U.S. Bank Arena, or in some cases, think about combining FC Cincinnati and U.S. Bank Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Cranley.
So we agree on the fact that we don't want to use general fund dollars, but we are willing to look at abatements and TIFs, anything that we would normally use for economic development to fill the gap. It won't be enough to get these projects done. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. And I do agree we need to prioritize with our capital dollars the infrastructure projects like Brent Spence, which isn't our bridge, but if we have to put in dollars, we want to be prepared. The Western Hills Viaduct, of course, is another major project. And then, of course, our roads and bridges. I think the bigger picture is we need to make sure we're also looking outside the city for resources. So this administration refused to apply for the Smart City Grant, which was awarded to Columbus, $50 million in a grant that they've leveraged to $450 million. We didn't even apply. Almost every city, including Canton in Ohio, applied. Cincinnati did not. 78 cities across the country applied, and Columbus got it, and we didn't because we didn't apply. We also haven't applied for RTA funds, which we qualify for. We have not applied successfully for a Tiger Grant because we refuse to apply for a project that will actually win. And so I think it's important for us to make sure that we're leveraging our dollar by looking outside for foundation dollars, grant dollars, and we've got to make sure that we rebuild our relationship with D.C., the one that we broke because of the battle over the streetcar, so that we can make sure that we can get that grant dollar back here in the city of Cincinnati.
You have 30 seconds.
She's constantly talking about this city hall as if she doesn't work there and that she has a job to do. We literally apply for hundreds of grants on a regular basis. And by the way, those grants help our police and our fire, and they often come with local matches. We were promised years ago that the streetcar would be majority funded by federal grants. In the end, the taxpayers locally had to pay $100 million. There are local costs to grants. And so, we don't go for every grant. It has to make sense for the people of Cincinnati. But if there's a grant that she wanted us to apply for, take accountability and introduce the legislation. She never asked us to apply for any of these grants or proposed legislation to do so.
Lincoln, your question will be for Ms. Simpson.
All right, you know, there's a proposal on the table for a new operating agreement between the city and the county to operate MSD for the next 48 years. Now, how will this agreement help lower the rates that payers like me have seen skyrocket the past decade? Will this agreement help lower those rates?
The short answer is we don't know, right? So the bigger question is what happens from here on out. We have a commitment letter that's been signed by the city and the county. There's still a lot of details left to iron out. Myself, after hearing from many people in the community saying they were not involved in the process and didn't get heard, we urged both parties to give at least a couple additional sessions so the community can be heard. But I think there was room for more robust input. I think the big thing is making sure that we have a board that reflects our values, and who those people are should not be political appointees, staff members of individual leaders' campaigns, but should be people who are ratepayers and people who know how to run a system. If we do that and we make sure that the discounts that are currently available to large businesses for MSD are also granted to people who don't have a lot, we could see a reduction in rates and we could see more fairness and equity across our system. I think it's important to make sure that we appoint the right people and that we continue to remind people that even though there's an outside board that will make these decisions, that they're accountable to us because we're accountable to the citizens.
Thank you.
Lincoln, yes, it will reduce the burden on the ratepayer because the dysfunctionality of the city-county relationship that went on for so long cost the ratepayers millions of dollars a year, $5 million by the most recent estimate, in duplicative costs and lawyer fees and litigation. So ending that fight by working across city-county will save ratepayers money. And what I'm very proud of is that most of the great achievements that we have made over the last 4 years have come from collaboration. I'm proud of the fact that I didn't put the city, I'm going to put the city ahead of the county. We're all part of the county. We're all ratepayers. And so I reached out with David Mann to Todd Portuna and Denise Driehaus, all of whom, by the way, are supporting my reelection, to put the common good ahead of political turf war. And if you look at all the major progress we've made over the last couple of years, whether it's on inclusion, whether it's on poverty, whether it's on the pension crisis that we resolved, in all of those cases, the approach that I have taken is to ask people to help, to reach out, to collaborate, to meet with people, even people I don't always agree with, because I believe that's how you get problems solved. That's the kind of leadership that I have provided and the kind of leadership that I promise to continue to provide in the future.
So what my opponent failed to say is that he was as much a part of the fights that rose the rates as anybody. I mean, we were fighting with the county a long time, and I do believe it was the change in leadership at the county that made this a much easier conversation. I want to thank both Denise Driehaus and Todd Portuna for their leadership. I do want to thank our representatives for representing us at that table as well, but we can't divorce ourselves from the chaos that was created by this very administration. I think the bigger question is how do we go forward? There are a lot of questions to be answered. We need accountability for the ratepayer. I was proud to have gotten citizens out when the flooding happened to make sure that their claims could be addressed and their questions could be answered. We need that kind of leadership in the future.
Tom McKee, your question is for Mr. Cranley.
There's been plenty of talk about upgrading Metro, making it more convenient for the east-west bus rider to be connected with jobs and or work or school. My question is this: how much money should go into that? But more importantly, when's the last time either one of you took a bus, let's say, from Evanston to Westwood or Evanston to Mount Airy to experience exactly what these people are going through that we are talking about but don't seem to be able to help that much?
I took a bus to work 2 weeks ago, and in fact, I figured out how to use Facebook Live for the first time as I was doing it, and it was a wonderful experience. I think one of the great challenges ahead of us is to build a true public transportation system. We need more public transportation. All the studies show that we are deeply underinvested in bus transit to get to and from your job. My vision is to have a future that integrates the streetcar, bus, Uber, taxi, and Lyft. In fact, today I had a meeting with Uber, and they are going to invest their resources to help people get from the end of a bus line to the last mile to their job or to the first mile to the bus route. This is a future-oriented transit plan that's real. And I'm not just talking big ideas. I'm the only candidate in this race that's put a specific plan to say, let's do what every other urban county in Ohio does. Let's have a county-wide transit tax, then reduce the city's income tax so that the city taxpayers are not double taxed. That would lead to a 50% increase in public funding for public transportation.
Thank you.
So a healthy transportation system is vital to any city, and right now our system isn't vital 4 years into John Cranley's term. I had the opportunity to ride from Walnut Hills to Mount Airy, as you said, and it took 2 hours and 2 transfers to make that trip. You can imagine anyone trying to take that trip. Who would take 4 hours round trip to get from home to work? It's not working, and this administration has done nothing to change that problem for the rider who lives in that circumstance. We do have a plan. Our plan is to study our current route system, as Columbus did. They added 100,000 riders just by reorganizing their routes. Added riders, did not spend another dollar in operations. We have to start by doing that. We have to include the voice of the rider. The plan that John Cranley is talking about did not have robust community engagement, did not talk to actual riders about what they need. So we need to make sure there's there. When John Cranley had the opportunity to lead on this issue, he vetoed bus shelters, appointed his campaign treasurer on the board to replace a frequent rider, so we don't have that perspective anymore, and ripped out bike lanes. A transit system is multimodal and has to work together. So we're saying, let's do that study. Let's make sure that once that study is done, we make sure people can get from home to work more efficiently. We make sure that we have late routes for people who work third shift, and that we have a frequency that would allow people to be able to get on that bus and know that it's going to be there when they need it. That's a plan, and we'll make sure that the voice is at the table every step of the way as we implement that plan.
Every study says that we need more funding, and we're deeply underfunded compared to other cities. The difference is I have the courage to tell you how I'm going to pay for it. There's no plan. When sort of looks at routes all the time, they optimize routes by cutting routes and cutting frequency. So if you're a bus rider, Councilmember Simpson has never proposed legislation to increase bus service. The only thing she's done is to spend money on the streetcar. I have put out a specific plan and have appointed people to the SORTA board that are going to pursue a true comprehensive system that integrates streetcar, bus, and Uber, taxi, and Lyft.
Back to Paula Christian, and your question will be to Ms. Simpson.
Affordable housing is a problem in Hamilton County. Now the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is trying to end its contract with the Alms Apartments, and another 118 families could become homeless. How did the low-income housing shortage get so bad in Cincinnati, and what would you do to improve it?
So it is really bad. I grew up in affordable housing. This is something that's very, very personal to me. That's why I'm proud of my record on being at the Alms regularly, the in-town, making sure that we're challenging and pushing developers of affordable housing, not just to provide a house, but to provide a home for people, one that's quality, that they would live in. I even challenge many of our developers to live in their own affordable housing for one night. I can tell you I didn't get many takers on that deal. So we need to make sure that we are investing. That's why I was the first to propose Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and I'm now putting forward legislation to make sure that we target the housing that is most necessary, that we include the voice of individuals who live in affordable housing on that board, that we make sure that we have housing that is sustainable, not just units, but housing that really serves people. The Scholar House is a great example, one that I've advocated for, which takes single moms and puts them in a facility in housing that has daycare on site, transportation, and they get a free education. That's wonderful, so that they can move up and out and not be in the same state for the rest of their lives. That's the type of housing that we will propose as your next mayor.
First of all, on the Alms itself, I've spent a great deal of time on this, including having several conference calls with HUD officials. And so far, they've been willing to work with us and legal aid that has been a partner to the city to preserve the option to stay in that building. I believe that we still will end up with a result that does not require the displacement of those families, and I'll be working very hard to make sure that continues to be the case. As you know, recently, unanimous City Council, through the collaboration of myself and Vice Mayor Mann and Kevin Flynn and PG Sittenfeld, change the abatement policies that are given out to residential and commercial developers to require a contribution to a citywide affordable housing fund that can be used only when neighborhoods support a project that makes sense for their neighborhood, but will increase significantly the supply. But at a big picture level, in my opinion, affordable housing is an income problem. People can't afford housing because they don't make enough money for the housing that's available. And that's why our efforts to reduce poverty and expand opportunity by getting the job training, the transportation improvements, the child care help, and in some cases, returning citizens the job training they need to get into jobs so they can take care of themselves and their families. And the collaboration we put together on those efforts, in my opinion, will do the most to help the crisis.
So the most important home for people is the one they're in right now, which is why I'm proud of my record of making sure that people stay in the homes that they have. We've worked very diligently with developers to make sure that that happens. We'll continue to do that. The Mayor's Hand Up initiative actually took money from a program called PWC, which keeps seniors in their homes. We were proud to be a part of a council that put $10 million in the development of new shelters. My increase to the Human Services Fund, $2.1 million, went to homeless prevention to keep people in their homes. We served over 12,000 people in the first year in that change. And since then, of course, that number has doubled and tripled.
Thank you, both of you. We just have a few minutes left in the television live broadcast, so we're going to move into what we're calling our speed round. So I will ask the questions, and each of you will have 30 seconds to reply. The first question, the response will start with Mr. Cranley, but the first question is this. The city has invested millions in downtown and OTR. Name 3 neighborhoods that need the city's help the most now.
Well, obviously, all the neighborhoods need help. We're not going to pick, among those. We certainly will continue to work with neighborhoods that have projects and can meet us. You've got tremendous momentum in Walnut Hills, tremendous momentum in College Hill, along the Hamilton Avenue corridor. You've got tremendous momentum. And in fact, I just spoke to the leadership in Madisonville last week and to the developer. They're going to close the Madison Wetzel project by December 31st of this year. So we're not going to pick just 3 neighborhoods. We're going to continue to invest in all neighborhoods.
So that is a tough choice, but I know that there are some that need it more, and I think my top choice would probably be the Winton Hills area. It's an area of extreme concentrated poverty that has seen little investment. When John Cranley went to Winton Hills as part of his safety meeting, they talked about the fact that crime comes into their community and they can't stop it. His solution was to build a fence around Winton Terrace with a 24-hour armed guard. The residents said we would feel like we were in a prison. That's because they would be. The real solution to Winton Hills is redevelopment of that housing and also making sure we have amenities in that community and programs that can serve the people. We've already started that work, and we would continue as your next mayor.
Thank you.
I got to respond to that. I mean, that's just a cheap shot. That's not true. The fact is, I was in Winton Hills on Saturday with my wife for the First Lady's Health Family Day. The fact is, I walked with our outreach worker after shootings in Winton Hills. The fact is, I've worshiped in Winton Hills with my wife at Mother of Christ Church. And what she's referencing is a meeting that I had to listen to the community. I never proposed a fence around a neighborhood, and she knows that. That's an outrageous mischaracterization of an actual discussion, of listening to people and trying to have a conversation and dialogue. And I believe, as I've said throughout the night, that collaboration is how you solve problems. She doesn't even want to meet with the mayor or people she disagrees with on a regular basis, as she hasn't for 4 years. When I engage in a conversation, she tries to twist it into an outrageous claim that has no truth behind it.
All right, I want to give you 30 seconds as well to respond.
Conversation is documented in the Inquirer. That's where you can find it. And I think we should own up to the fact that that was an out-of-touch reference. I've talked to the members of Winton Terrace, and they said that those conversations are still ongoing, and they're still hearing talk of building a fence around their community. We have been working in Winton Terrace to restore trust with those individuals and make sure they know we're going to invest in their community and not build a fence with an armed guard, otherwise known as a prison, in Winton Terrace. We've had little to no investment, actually no investment in that community over the last 4 years under John
All right,
Cranley's
let's
leadership.
move on to the next question. We want you to each give a compliment to your opponent. We'll start with you, Ms. Simpson. After this, wasn't that great? Next question.
So many options. Where do I start? I've said this on the record. I think one of the most remarkable things that John Cranley has done, which I support, is the creation of the Innocence Project here in Cincinnati. I was a law student in my third year when the project came to UC, so I wasn't able to participate. But that project has done a lot to help individuals who otherwise would be in jail serving time for a sentence that, for a crime they didn't commit. So I think his leadership on that at the time that he did it was absolutely remarkable.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
As I said the other day, I think that the life trajectory of Councilmember Simpson, coming from tough backgrounds and achieving what she's achieved, is inspirational. And her ability to tell that story is emotionally resonant. And I applaud her for it.
Okay, this will be the last of the speed round questions. What is the #1 new program you will push as mayor?
Well, safety is always the #1 priority. We'll put more cops on the street and take a tough love approach to the heroin epidemic. Tough love in that we got to continue to provide addiction services to those who need it, but also require that they take advantage of that addiction service with more beds and opportunities. And we've got to bring down the drug rings who are bringing in these drugs from other countries into our community. But safety, reducing the violence, and supporting our first responders, cops, and firefighters is always the top priority.
All right, thank you.
So we have a three-part platform. One involves safety, which includes adopting a violence prevention model, which makes sure that individuals never pick up a gun in the first place. We've seen some great results with our pilot. We want to extend that. We make sure young people who have been exposed to violence get the treatment they need so that they never become violent ever in the first place. We've seen stories that we've talked about, Avondale kids who picked up their first gun because they were being robbed on the way from home to school, and they picked up that first gun to protect themselves. No child should ever have to carry a gun just to get to school. So our work will make sure that those kids aren't in a position to ever have to pick up a gun.
Thank you both for that. This does conclude the live television broadcast of this Cincinnati mayoral debate. We want you to know that we're going to continue streaming this online at WCPO.com and on Facebook, so please go there if you're not there already. We would like to thank the Cincinnati Art Museum for providing the facility here, plus our co-sponsors, Radio 1 and the Greater Cincinnati Pro Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. And we would like to thank the candidates, of course, for sharing their views, and the audience members as well for being so cooperative. Reminder, we will be on Facebook Live and WCPO.com and on Radio 1, so don't go anywhere there. But for now, thanks so much. Let's give everyone a hand.
WDBZ and the Society of Professional Journalists.
You just joining us online. We will continue now with our mayoral debate. Thanks so much for being with us. And for those of you watching on Facebook, you can submit your question for the candidate online. We're going to try to get to those in this next half hour. First, we want to go back to our panelist, Lincoln Ware, who has a question. We'll start with Ms. Simpson.
All right. We keep hearing that the streetcar needs to be expanded uptown to make it more successful. Are you for or against that? And how would it be paid for? And we just found out that both of you did take a ride on the Metro. Have either of you taken a ride on the streetcar for a personal business, not because you're an elected official?
So I spent the better part of my childhood riding the bus. We didn't always have a reliable transportation. And so when I was just 15 years old, I had a job downtown, and I would take the bus every day. I rode the bus almost every day through law school and in my work as a practicing lawyer. And of course, more recently, riding the bus. We tried to find one day in my schedule where I could actually get to all of my appointments on the bus. I couldn't get to 2 appointments and get there on time on our bus system. I mean, that's as good an example of why our bus system doesn't work. The streetcar, again, needs to be a part of and always was supposed to be a part of a multimodal system. And I think if we decide to extend it, which I think we will, as part of this bigger picture, we know that the economic development along the line has to pay for the operations of it. So we have to see enough economic development coming from that system. We also have to see a major commitment from sponsors to make sure that we pay for it, and we have to get sufficient capital dollars from some sort of grant system.
Thank you.
If we don't have that, then we won't be able to do it. But I think with that, we can see the project completed.
No, I don't believe that's the priority. I think the priority has to be expanding transportation to those who need it, not for fun, but because they're trying to get to and from their jobs. That's why my plan that is specific and lays out a way to pay for it will integrate streetcar, bus, Uber, taxi, and Lyft, but focus on expanding bus service across the county and to help people get to and from their jobs. The fact is, we know how they will pay for the streetcar because it's how they paid for the first streetcar. They will raise your property taxes, which they did, for the debt that was needed for the streetcar, and they would deprioritize other basic services. The reason why we had such depleted roads and bridges when I took office, that we spent a huge amount of effort reprioritizing, is because they put the streetcar ahead of the basic services of neighborhoods. So you either take away or raise taxes or do both. Unfortunately, we've seen both, and that's the only way to pay for an expansion of the streetcar. I believe if you're going to expand transportation dollars, we should have a duty to help the most number of people for the amount of money that becomes available. It is more efficient and more helpful to people dependent on public transportation to focus that effort on bus service.
What my opponent continues to forget is that we've had hundreds of millions of dollars in development as a result of the streetcar. GE is where it is, in part because of the streetcar. Amazon, in their application, they want to know about our transit, not just about buses, but what our commitment is to making sure that we have other types of transit like fixed rail or bus rapid transit. I think it's important to make sure we're going to be a 21st century city that we're not afraid to talk about big picture. And yes, our bus system needs improvement. John Cranley's administration has done nothing to improve it over the last 4 years. So we'll prioritize that. But we also can walk and chew gum at the same time. And so we have to make sure that we build out a multimodal system that includes all options.
The next question is from Tom McKee. It'll be to Mr. Cranley.
Budgets are very tight. We all know that. Why not explore shared services with Hamilton County? In fact, name 2 things that we could explore right now that could be combined to save money. And part 2 of the question, what communities do we maybe go after and see if they want to be annexed to the city to expand the tax base?
Well, the first one is sewer district, which we're in the midst of, one of the great breakthroughs of dysfunctionality of many, many decades that is now working in the right direction. And I believe that successful collaboration leads to additional collaborations. We have a great working relationship with law enforcement, with the sheriff and the police department and the coroner, and, by the way, with the federal government, with U.S. Attorney, FBI, where we work together to go after repeat violent offenders. And that has been a major effort to additional collaborate. In fact, we have a monthly meeting where the whole department heads from all these different groups come together, including probation, because it's a very small number of people that commit the vast majority of violent crime. And our police, in concert with the probation department, generally know, with the intelligence they get from our outreach workers, et cetera, who the people are. And so collaborating on law enforcement is a critical item. Sewer district, purchasing, things of that nature.
So there are 2 examples that we didn't take advantage of that we should have. And one was the crime lab, which I talked about before, which was an opportunity for us to combine with the county to keep the crime lab in the city of Cincinnati and make sure that we have a way to, that our evidence is received by the coroner as quickly as possible. And we could have saved costs because we actually have a building where our evidence is kept. So that would have been great. We decoupled from the permitting center. So now we have 2 different facilities for that, 2 different operations for that. That would have been a great opportunity. I think by centralizing our administration, which I think we can do, we could outsource our administration to other municipalities who can't pay for it. We already, with Waterworks, our billing, we do billing for cities as far away as Virginia. the cities in Virginia. And so we have the opportunity, because there are many small municipalities who can't do things like the HR function very well, who can't do things like billing very well, who can't do finance very well. If we have a state-of-the-art administration, we could actually assist for fee many of our municipalities in doing that very base work. So I think it's important for us to look for opportunities as simple as that.
She keeps mentioning the crime lab. The leader of the crime lab is the coroner, Lakshmi Samarkar, who has done an amazing job of pushing that issue to the forefront. She is supporting my reelection, and I have been with her every step of the way. And we are doing what makes sense for the city and the county to move the crime lab forward. Another collaboration is the heroin task force that Denise Treehouse is leading, and we're combining investments and resources. We just recently announced a whole series of new investments in new beds and new addiction services and quick response time from the Talbert House and others.
Thank you. The next question is from Paula, and it will be to Ms. Simpson.
We talked about the Children's Hospital expansion and how some neighbors were opposed to it. And then we've recently heard from neighbors who were opposed to this huge student housing project in Clifton Heights. Do neighbors have any right to complain about what new development looks like? And does the city have any responsibility to make sure that conversations are taking place between developers and the neighbors where they will be building?
Yes and yes. And I think that that process should be prescribed from the very beginning. We're going to build out a community engagement office within the city manager's office if I'm the mayor. And we're going to make sure that we have a process where community voice is first, where developers have the notice about how that process is going to look. And once that community engagement period closes and the development goes forward, right now we do that backwards. The developer puts together their really big plan. They come to the community and say, how do you like our plan? Oh, by the way, we can't change it now, but we want you to see it. And then nothing changes. They have meeting after meeting, and the community doesn't have a say. Here's why we want to include the community. They live there. They pay taxes there. What happens next to them impacts them more than anybody. So, of course, we're going to have an opportunity. We're not going to let it slow down development. We're not going to let it hinder development, particularly if we have a process from the beginning that requires real engagement. Not bring me a plan already done and don't complain, and if you complain, I can't change it. But really, we want to do a development. What kind of things do you want to see? We also need to make sure planning is at the forefront.
Ms. Simpson, thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And, you know, as an attorney at KMK representing a bunch of projects, having done a project at East Price Hill that's helped revitalize neighborhoods of East Price Hill, the Incline District and Incline Public House, we went through that planning process. We went through community engagement, and our project was better because of it. We did change a lot about our project because we listened and worked with communities. And you mentioned two very important examples. The student housing project was rushed through with very little involvement, and still a judgment call as to whether it was the right thing to do. I think it was, as did Councilmember Simpson. But Children's Hospital, that you also mentioned, spent years, literally years, working with the community, talking with the community, and asking for feedback. And they were open to discussions for years. And as we know, a last-minute demand was made of them at the last second, almost derailed the project. But in a case like that, you got to look at the greater good. And Children's investing $500 million in Avondale is a good thing. It's good for the people of Avondale. It's good for the children of Avondale. It's good for the community. And I think it's kind of a baseline issue, if you want to be mayor, to work with an institution like Children's, not oppose them at the last second, and to bring those jobs into the city.
So I'll say it again. Community engagement requires that the plan actually changes to reflect what the community wants to see. And it's important to make sure that we require that early on. The earlier, the better, and that it's really meaningful engagement. My opponent tried to kill the planning department because he felt like it was going to be an impediment to developers. We need to make sure our planning department is robust so that we have neighborhood plans so the developers know what they can and can't do from the very beginning. And we also need to make sure that we don't make decisions that hinder the community's voice. The mayor tore down the Denison against the objection of many, or allowed the tear down of the Denison against the objection of many residents saying, we need to let the market decide. Well, I believe that the community should decide.
I didn't tear down any buildings. I'm not particularly good at
Mr. Cranley,
physical
thank
labor.
you. We're going to go to Lincoln, whose question will be for Mr. Cranley.
All right, you know, just 10% of registered voters turned out for the primary election for mayor. Why is that? Is it discouragement with the locally elected officials? Is it a perceived failure to serve all the people? Why do you think only 10% of registered voters turned out for the primary?
I don't know, and given the results, I'm hoping for a much bigger turnout in November. I think fundamentally we've got to make a case to the people as to, you know, who is the better person to lead the city to the future. As I've said, we have a track record of progress on jobs, on safety, on neighborhoods, on inclusion. And I think it's fair to say objectively that the city is in a better place today than it was 4 years ago. The question is, why change? Why not continue to progress and attack new frontiers of a better transportation plan, continue the progress we're making on heroin, continue to clean up neighborhoods and a housing court to hold landlords accountable, invest in solar, renewable energy at Lunken Airport like I've proposed to improve the environment, and ask people to give back to the city in our Give Back plan for the future. And I'm hoping that people will find that to be the best vision for the future, and I'm hoping they will come out and vote, and I hope they will vote for me.
So that number is double the amount in 2013, so I think I have a little bit to do with that. So we saw a much higher turnout during the primary most recently. It's not just important that I won the primary by 11 points. It's the idea that 2/3 of voters voted for someone other than our current administration. I think that means that people think that we're doing fine, but they also know that we can do better, and they believe that someone else can carry that vision forward. I've articulated a very bold vision for us to be the #1 urban city in the country. Why do I believe that's possible? Well, people thought that a girl from the projects couldn't run and potentially become the next mayor. I know there's no such thing as impossible. And so we're going to set this vision and we're going to move forward to make our city the best it can be. I joined council because I wanted to be a part of a wave which, you know, was started, I think, in the previous administration. And Mark Mallory has endorsed my campaign, and many of the accomplishments that John Cranley is talking about were started under his leadership, frankly. We need that vision again, and we need to make sure that it spreads across our city to people who may not have a voice at the table now, but when I'm mayor, they will be the most consistent and most important voice in my administration.
She continues to use the word vision a lot. I really don't know the substance of her plans, of her proposals, or how she's going to pay for any of them, or even really what they are specifically. The only content that she's provided this entire campaign to visionary is that she described her children's approach as visionary. And that's fine. We have an honest disagreement. But that is not a visionary plan for the future. I believe that helping people out of poverty, focusing on safety, continuing to put cops on the street, having a real plan for transportation, a real plan for solar renewable energy, a real plan to clean up the litter and put a housing court that will help neighborhoods, that's specifics of a vision for the future.
Cranley. Tom, you have the next question. It'll go to Ms. Simpson.
For this next question, I've reached out to the student journalists at the Chatterbox newspaper at Walnut Hills High School, many of whom are in the audience tonight. And here's the question they had. With the heroin epidemic being so prevalent in Cincinnati, do you think that harsher punishment is truly an effective form of prevention, or should we focus our energy more on the after-the-fact treatment program?
So I want to thank the students at Walnut Hills for that amazing question. Our young people always have something to say, and I love to listen to them. That is a very good question. So what we need to do is have a three-pronged approach, really four, to heroin. One, we're doing really well, which is Narcan. That's reversal. We need to make sure that we have treatment beds available whenever someone makes a decision that they're ready to enter. We need to make sure that law enforcement goes after the people who are bringing fentanyl, which is making this so deadly, into our community, focus on those individuals. And finally, we need to find a way to make sure, and this is a little visionary, to see if we can hold individuals for maybe 72 hours after the administration of Narcan, if they're a repeat administration, so that we give them the time, if they are a threat to themselves and others, give them the time to be able to make the decision to go into treatment. But that requires a lot of energy, and we haven't seen that so far. And so I think it's really important for us to lead on this issue in a multifaceted way. And right now, we're only focused on that one, which is why we're seeing fatigue on the part of our first responders, because they're reviving people 2 or 3 times in a day.
Well, those are some good ideas, and if we're not doing any of them, propose the legislation to do them. But the fact is that we are making some progress. In addition to the Narcan and to the first responders and additional beds, and I agree with Councilmember Simpson, we should require a tough love approach that requires people to stay in addiction services when they have OD'd. We also got to get to the root of the problem. The Center for Disease Control put out a report that 80% of people who are addicted to heroin started with painkillers that were prescribed to them by their doctor. 1 in 3 of people who take OxyContin for a month are addicted a year later. 1 in 3. Those are Russian roulette type odds. That's nuts. There has to be a change to the entire industry of how opiates are prescribed. A couple weeks ago on this very issue, I met with several other mayors and Governor Kasich, and we talked through what they're doing. And they have the licensing board for pharmacies and for doctors, and they're requiring to get special permission to do more than 5 days of opiates at a time. I think that's a step in the right direction. The big companies, the manufacturers and distributors have already pled guilty to purposely marketing drugs that they would be know to be addictive. That's why we're suing as well, to be reimbursed for our direct costs, but more importantly, is to try to change the industry from an overprescription of opiates.
So I proposed this legislation a year ago, and the administration hasn't implemented any of our strategies. John Cranley keeps saying he's collaborative, but his administration does not respond to certain members of council's requests, mine being among them. John Cranley continues to say that he's collaborative, but he's executed more vetoes than the 2 mayors before him combined. So when members get together and they get their colleagues together and they say, we've got 5 votes, he holds a press conference and stamps a veto on it, which is not collaborative at all. And so I think it's very important that when members of council bring forward visionary legislation, that it's adopted by the administration.
All right, thank you so much for that. And Paula, your next question goes to Mr. Cranley.
What is your plan to find the money to fix the crumbling Western Hills Viaduct? And how much money should the city contribute?
Well, good question. The county owns the bridge, so it's important. We fix the roads that we own. They fix the bridges that they own. We will help. There's no question. It's so important and so expensive that they're going to require our help. Commissioner Portune has put out a specific plan to pay for it, and a plan is better than no plan. So until we hear a better plan, I think that's better than nothing. I've also proposed, as I think you know and others know, that if we can get a countywide transportation sales tax like every other urban county in Ohio, I would propose, not double taxing city residents for public transportation, but reducing the earnings tax from 2.1 to 1.9 instead of 1.8, and that extra 1.1 would produce about $17 million a year, which I think should be devoted exclusively to Smale Commission infrastructure, roads and bridges like this. And that could be a source of funding for something like that and a partnership with the county to get the job done.
So we agree that the most significant infrastructure project that the city needs to participate in is Western Hills Viaduct. Again, we don't own it, but we can partner with them on the application of grants. I was talking to a member of the commission today, and he asked me why City Hall hasn't taken a vote to support their application for grant funding for Western Hills Viaduct. I told him I don't know why we haven't done that. So what I get to do tomorrow is ask the administration why we wouldn't partner with the county to apply for essential grant funding for that project. If we join with the county on that application, it's going to make it much stronger. We also need to make sure that we understand that we're going to have to commit some dollars to this project. If we had reserved a portion of our capital budget for major infrastructure projects before now, which is my plan to do that in the future, we'd actually have a lot more money to be able to do the infrastructure projects that John Cranley is talking about. TIF districts were also set up to do major infrastructure, but we built more parking garages with TIF dollars than we built sidewalks and roads for communities. And so we need to make sure that we prioritize, particularly for community-based TIFs, that money doesn't go into parking garages for private development, but that goes into rebuilding infrastructure within communities. And so those are just a few things that we need to do on the infrastructure side. But I think the start is to make sure that we co-apply with the county for grant funding for the Western Hills Viaduct.
I just want to respond to the comments you made earlier about the vetoes. You know, balancing the budget's not easy. It's easy to propose spending that's unstructurally balanced. That's how we got into the mess that S&P and Moody's downgraded our credit a month before I was elected. Through making tough decisions, going to retirees and union members and asking them to give up benefits for the greater good of the pension, vetoing spending, we've balanced the budget. We've raised the credit rating of the city by S&P and Moody's. Yeah, that's not always a popular thing to do, but it's the kind of mayor that we need, the kind of leadership that we need.
Thank you. Our last question from our panelists will come from Lincoln Ware, and it will go to Ms. Simpson.
If elected mayor, how committed will you be to upholding the city's end of the collaborative agreement? I know the FOP was a little slow to sign on to it, but would you be, committed to upholding all the terms and agreements of the collaborative agreement of this new structure that we have?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to make sure that we do that. I think the refresh, which I believe was proposed at first by members of the community who were responsible for the first collaborative agreement being executed, was a good one. I think it was a good idea. I think we need to commit to make sure that we're doing the work every single day, though, not just because we are required to do it or have a study. I think the commitment to making sure that we have community-police relationships is important, making sure that CCA, the Citizens Complaint Authority, is fully funded, making sure we're monitoring our traffic enforcement to make sure that it's not biased every year and reporting that data to the community is important, making sure the number of young people who are arrested doesn't go up, which has happened in this administration, is important. We need to make sure that we're doing that every day. And we don't do that every 15 years. We do that every day. And so I'm committed to making sure we do that and that we have a robust community engagement platform through our Office of Community Engagement and the city manager to constantly hear not just what actually is happening, but how are people feeling? Because I think a lot of our citizens are feeling like we're not as committed as we were when this was first executed. So we'll make sure we do that under my administration.
Oh, absolutely. As you know, I served on council when the collaborative agreement was established. I'm proud of the small role that I played, along with many others, including the people who brought the lawsuit against the city to create what Loretta Lynch under President Obama called the role model for police community relations around the country. In 2016, we saw a lot of unjustified shootings across the country of citizens by the police, and we saw unjustified shootings of cops. And tensions were rising across the country. And so we had a community forum at the New Prospect Baptist Church, and I called for the update, but I also called so that it would have teeth to bring back Saul Green, the guy that was a court-appointed monitor back during the original collaborative agreement, who has a reputation of not being afraid to call it like he sees it. And so he has come back, and he is updating and looking under the hood. And what's wonderful is that the leadership of our police department embraced this from day one. The FOP went sideways for a minute, but they came back, thank God. But regardless, we were moving forward and would move forward either way. But we're glad that they're back in. And the culture has really changed in our police department over the last 16 years. It's not perfect. There's always room for improvement. But we have some of the best police community relations in the country because of the collaborative. And the update will continue.
So I just want to remind everyone that the collaborative was executed because members of our community sued the city to make it happen. And the refresh happened because members of our community began to complain again, and the mayor responded. Things like we were starting to not report the disparity in traffic enforcement, and that those numbers were showing, once reported, that they were disproportionately we were disproportionately stopping members of the minority community, which I'm sure the report will show. That CCA wasn't being fully staffed and fully funded. It's important to make sure that we give credit where credit is due, and it was the community voice that led to this, and that's why I think it should stay at the table, not just when we do a refresh, but every single day.
Ms. Simpson, thank you so much. Listen, this is the end of the debate, so we're going to close with statements, and we will start with Ms. Simpson. You will each have 2 minutes.
My name is Yvette Simpson, and I am running to be your next mayor. We need a bold vision for our city. That's why my vision is to make us the #1 urban city in the country. We can only accomplish this vision if our city is greater, not for those who do well already, not just for those the least, but for everyone. We have to have a city that's working for all. As your next mayor, I will bring our city together in a way that we need right now. I have lived in both the hills of Cincinnati that we brag about and the valleys that we never talk about. And I am equipped to understand the diverse needs of both of these populations. I will be a leader who truly listens. I'll say that again, truly listens to residents and puts their needs first. We need a mayor who understands that the most important and consistent voice at any decision-making table should be the people we actually seek to serve. We now have the mayor of good enough. He said it here. We're doing just fine. But we need a mayor who knows that nothing is impossible and will work to accomplish even greater things for our city in the future. 2/3 of primary voters said that they want a change in leadership. They deserve better. We believe we can be a better leader. As mayor, our work will be focused on people in place. We have a plan to prioritize neighborhoods, which is on our website if the mayor wants to see it, ensuring that every neighborhood is clean and safe, neighborhoods receive the investment they need to grow, that we engage residents in determining their future. We will ensure that our residents are prepared for the jobs of tomorrow, not the jobs of today, and that our children have the tools they need to be successful. This is my home. This is my city. I am ready to lead right now, and I humbly ask for your vote starting tomorrow and through November 7th. Thank you.
We are making progress, and we should not put that progress at risk. That's the fundamental issue in this election. Do you believe the city's moving in the right direction? If so, vote for me. If you believe that we're not, vote for Councilmember Simpson. But we have much further to go. We are going to continue to prioritize safety, which we have, but there's more to do. We're going to continue to use policies that bring jobs into the city, not work against people at the last second. We're going to continue to make neighborhoods the priority, not special projects at City Hall. We're going to pursue a real plan with real numbers and real math to expand public transportation. We're going to clean up the environment by adopting the largest single municipal-led investment in solar renewable energy in the country. And we will continue to do the things that have made everything else work for us, which is collaborate and work with people, which is why I've asked citizens to give back. You know, where does all this come from for me? My values, my family, my faith. I was inspired by President Kennedy's ask not what you can do for your country, but what you can do. Ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That's why I've asked people to give back, and people want to give back. That's the values that my wife, Dina, and I are giving to our kids. My wife's the immigrant story that her family is the American dream. My family, and my parents are here, is the immigrant story a long time ago coming over here to build a better country and a better community. This is our city, and we are making progress, and I don't want to see that progress put at risk. And whether it's P&G's fight today or reaching for Amazon.com, I think we need a mayor that knows how to get the job done. And we've gotten a lot of jobs into the city. Thank you very much.
That does conclude tonight's debate, sponsored by Night on Your Side, Radio 1, and the Greater Cincinnati Pro Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. We have certainly covered a lot of topics here tonight. I think we can all agree on that. I want to thank the panelists, our thanks to the audience, and of course to our candidates and you at home as well. Let's give a big hand for everyone.